Hey, and welcome to the Adventures in Advising podcast. This is Matt Markin, and if you can believe it, this episode is celebrating 5 years of the podcast that started back in January of 2020. Did I think we'd get to 5 years, over 100 episodes, and over 200 guest interviews? Nope. So thank you to everyone who has been part of this journey, from each guest host, each of you listening, whether you've listened to one episode or 50 or every episode. This podcast was made for you, and this podcast has and will always be a free resource. So on today's episode, we have 2 interviews. Let's get to the first one, guest hosted by Dr. Megumi Makino-Kanehiro from University of Hawaiʻi at Mānoa.
Okay, well, to open, I just wanted to explain to listeners out there why it's so important that we are doing this interview. So I, like many other fans of the Adventures in Advising podcast, have repeatedly asked Matt to do an episode based on the podcast itself, kind of like an Adventures in Advising behind the scenes type podcast episode. But I have also been even more curious about the very, very hardworking superhero behind the adventures, which I'll dub Super Matt behind the mic. So I feel very honored to be the one to interview Matt, because I know that many others have encouraged him to do an episode like this. And I think that, like drops of water landing on the same spot over many, many years and wearing away the stone, I was the lucky drop of water that was finally able to get him to say yes. We'll start off with a few questions about the podcast. For those who don't know, when and how did Adventures in Advising start?
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Megumi. And yeah, just to give a little context, you and a few others, so including Ann Bingham and Mercedes Butler, have asked numerous times throughout the years about having me interviewed, and I've always turned it down. I felt nervous to do it. I felt we should share everyone else's stories. And yeah, and then the last time that you had asked, I said, you know what? Maybe we'll do it, and let's save it for the 5th anniversary of the podcast. So thank you for continuously asking, and I really do appreciate you and Mercedes as well. But yeah, the podcast, when and how it started. So the official first episode went out January of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
But before that, kind of going back to the NACADA International Conference, and I think the last international conference they had was in 2019 in Belgium. And I was at the kind of welcome reception after the keynote. Didn't really know that many individuals there. Everyone seemed to be in conversation. So I kind of was just walking around and made a beeline to head out and leave the welcome reception, where I ran into Brett McFarlane and started chatting with him. And then Colin Cronin knew Brett, and then we got introduced. And then Charlie Nutt comes up, talks to Brett, talks to us. Brett needed to leave. And then Charlie just says, you and Colin work together. And then walked off into the sunset. And Colin and I are just standing there looking at each other like, okay, I guess we need to figure out how we're going to work together. And we had common interest in videos and interviews. And then I had suggested, why don't we do a podcast? I don't know how to do it, but maybe we'll do it. We asked Charlie before we left the conference, and Charlie had said, hold off on it. And a few months go by, and then we all ended up at the NACADA annual conference that year in October of 2019 in Louisville, Kentucky. And then we asked Charlie again, hey, what about that podcast idea? And he said, you have my blessing, go for it, make it happen. He said, I don't know how you all could do it, just do it. And that's kind of how Charlie is. And yeah, so luckily we did a few interviews actually at the Louisville conference, and that ended up being the basis of the first 2 episodes of the podcast. So yeah, and we had no idea what we were doing. We kind of figured it out as we went along, trial and error. I kind of cringe listening back at those first few episodes, but it needed to happen for the growth that happened with the podcast since then.
And what was the original purpose or intent of the podcast?
Honestly, it was to share everyone's stories. When I think about when you go to a conference, it's like, how much engagement actually does happen between attendees. You might go to a session and the presenter has a slide on their institution, their name, and what they do there. But, there's not really time to explain like anything more of their background. Or if you're at that session, you're sitting next to someone before the session starts. Typically it's, what's your name? What do you do? Where do you work? And then kind of conversation ends there. I've always been interested to know like the why, like what was someone's journey? What was their background like? How did they get to where they're at? Collaborations happen. Awesome. But to me, it's always that personal aspect that's missing. And that's why, like with this, usually the first question on most interviews of this podcast is, tell us about your journey. Tell us about your origin story. Let's get to know you on that personal level. And I just felt like there's so many stories to share in higher ed that aren't being told. And I also wanted to bring in individuals that maybe they're not like the president or AVP or have some high title or position. Let's bring in people that are on the front lines every day that maybe aren't getting the recognition or have experience and have knowledge that they could share with everyone. So that's kind of the basic purpose of it. But it wasn't until not too long ago that someone was like, well, you also know this podcast can contribute to public facing scholarship and the professionalization of advising. I was like, oh, I guess that could be true. So yeah, to me, it's also a way of having this professional development, listening to these interviews. Maybe there's tips and tricks that people can pick up on based off each interview and each topic that they can bring back into their advising practice.
Nice. So nice. And I know you've reached a ton of different milestones in your time with the podcast, but what milestones have you reached?
Yeah, no, great question. So this past June 2024, podcast made it to its 100th episode, which I never thought we'd get to that episode for sure. But also that same month, the podcast reached over 50,000 downloads since the beginning. And with this going out January of 2025, this is also the 5th anniversary of the podcast starting. So it's the gift that keeps on giving.
Well, congratulations. That's all so exciting. And it seems like I can't think back to a time when the podcast didn't exist. I feel like it's been here the whole time. And did you ever imagine in your wildest dreams that you would still be doing the podcast now?
Absolutely not. There was a time I did take like a 3-month break, and that was actually when I thought I was going to actually end the podcast. And that was with episode 75 back in January 2023. I had just gotten burnt out at that point, and I was like, went to the extreme of like, all right, it's winding down, and I felt okay with it ending, but I didn't feel great with it ending. And Melinda Anderson was the one who said, okay, you don't need to jump to that extreme. Why don't you just like take a break and then think about it and see if you want to continue it? But she was like, you have so many other stories to tell. And if you need help, she's like, I'm here. And she's been great because I've been able to lean on her as a guest host for multiple episodes. But the other day I was looking at kind of like average lifespans of podcasts. And I guess that the average lifespan is about 6 months. And when you look at the average of like number of episodes, it's about 50 episodes. But when you dig deeper and kind of, because the average doesn't really take into account like what the median number might be. But when you look at a lot of the podcasts, I guess they kind of fizzle out after like 10 episodes or less. And I honestly thought when we started this podcast, we'd get like 5 episodes in and then it would be done, because this was never like a job responsibility. Like this is outside of what I do at the institution I work at. And a lot of times when you have those like extracurricular activities or those hobbies, a lot of times they get put off to the side because other priorities, take priorities. So to have this go on as long as it has, I never thought in a million years it would be where it's at right now.
Well, sounds like we owe Melinda a lot. So, listeners, if you see Melinda, please give her a hug because she encouraged Matt to continue going. And we're so lucky that it is continuing to flourish. So, this is one of the things I've been dying to know. How long does it take you to create each episode, kind of from start to finish? And a related question, which is kind of our running joke personally, do you ever sleep? Because I suspect the answer is no or very rarely.
Yeah, so I do sleep, maybe not as much as I should. And that's not to say that it's for sure because of the podcast. A lot of times I'll lay in bed and I'm just scrolling TikTok and then it's 3 a.m. and all of a sudden I'm like, yeah, I probably should get some sleep because I got to wake up in a couple hours. But in terms of like an average episode, let's say you have like one guest on the episode, and a lot of these episodes have numerous guests. But for each interview, I would say I do about an hour of pre-work, kind of really looking up the guest and have they written any publications that I can skim through that I could base some questions off of. I usually ask them for their bio so I can skim through that and maybe pick out some questions, see what kind of activities they might be doing in other organizations like NACADA, just so I can kind of get more of that background and understanding of that person. The actual recording is about an hour recording session and then about an hour of editing afterwards. Now the editing, I probably take more to an extreme than others. Usually I'll listen to see is there any tech issues or audio issues because of the internet with it being recorded that I might have to take out. I look to adjust any volume depending on the guest or myself on how the volume, if there's any issues there, as well as taking out any what I would call like dead space. As a guest might be thinking of an answer and then giving the answer. So kind of condensing those things down. So could I take a little less time editing? Sure, but it's about an hour there. And then I would say about 30 minutes to an hour of creating the social media posts that go along with promoting the episode and trying to find that unique 30-second sound bite that can be used for extra promotion. So maybe for like one guest, one episode, about 4-ish hours altogether.
Wow. And you have done how many? Let's quickly do the math here.
Well, I mean, this would be episode 113. Now, granted, I do save an hour here and there when I have some guest host on, but I still have to be there for the recording session, editing, and all of that. Yeah. And then to think you have many episodes that have multiple guests on there. I don't know. I was trying to do a calculation the other day, and I would say probably over the last 5 years, it's at least probably 650 hours devoted over the last 5 years to it.
And we are so grateful for you. Yeah. So please, listeners, if you see Matt, give him a hug as well, because he really deserves it. I mean, it's amazing that it's lasted this long, that it's so strong, that, the viewership, not readership,
maybe listenership, yeah,
is so faithful and is learning so much, and so yeah, we really appreciate all of that. In terms of Adventures in Advising, where do you hope to take it in the future? Like, what is the future direction you foresee for this?
Yeah, fantastic question. I'm still thinking about that. I know for sure the podcast will continue. I mean, I already have guests kind of lined up and guest hosts up over the next few months. I think for sure we're going to hear from a lot of new guests, and we're probably going to also have a lot more guest hosts this year, just to have more voices, in this this public scholarship. There'll be some new things happening.
Exciting!
But for sure, the continuation of the podcast is at least going to continue on in 2025.
Like the true professional you are. There's the teaser, folks. So keep on tuning in because new things are in store for us. So now we get to the fun part of this. And what I've done is set up kind of a lightning round, late night show style, kind of rapid fire. So please provide one word or one sentence answers And the following 20 questions are meant to give the listenership a good picture of you very quickly. So we'll see how fast we can trailblaze through these, and then we have some other questions. So
I'll do my best. I will say this is, as an introvert, this is like an introvert's nightmare.
I'm so sorry. And for those of you who are listening, I will tell you that Matt has no idea what I'm about to ask. He does not know what these questions are. So he's doing a very brave thing. So first question is favorite color.
Favorite color is blue. I don't have a particular shade.
Favorite subject in school growing up.
It was actually math, because I did major in math for a little bit before I changed it when I was a junior in college.
Oh, that sounds like it might be a starry as well. Worst subject in school growing up in terms of you not liking it.
Oh, I would say probably writing. I've never been a good writer, something I had to work at. So like my English classes, and especially in middle school.
Wow. Okay. All of the English teachers or English majors at heart are going, oh no. Favorite movie or TV show?
I'll do both, actually. So favorite TV show, I will say, actually I have two super favorite ones. So 6 Feet Under and also The West Wing, which The West Wing is thanks to Kevin Thomas. He would always talk about The West Wing. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to start watching the show and love it. Favorite movie is actually a Tom Cruise movie, Top Gun.
Ah, okay. And favorite book?
Ooh, I had a feeling that question was going to come up. I'll have to get back to you on that one.
Okay.
Because, yeah, I do have some favorite books, but a lot of the favorite books I have are comic books.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah. That's totally fine. So do you have a favorite comic book then?
I do. I'm a huge Batman fan. I'm a Batman nerd. And the Nightfall saga from the 90s has got to be my favorite.
Cool. And see, now a lot of Batman aficionados out there are like, whoa, cool. Favorite kind of food?
Oh, it's got to be Korean food. Yeah. I love good kimchi.
Got it. Favorite holiday?
Probably Christmas.
Oh, see, and this is kind of bad because I want to ask you follow-up questions, but it's not designed that way. So we might come back to something.
Okay.
Guilty pleasure?
Junk food.
Junk food. Yeah. Any specific kind of junk food?
Sour candy, sour worms. Yeah. If there's a bag, if I bought one, I find one. Yeah. Usually it's like 7 servings in that bag and I'll eat it in one.
I see. Okay. Your kryptonite?
Rapid fire questions where I don't know the questions ahead of time.
Oh gosh, I love that answer. Okay. Your love language?
Oh, gift giving.
Gift giving. Okay. I am not surprised. MBTI?
Oh, this is a few years off. INTJ, I think, are would be the letters. Yeah.
Okay. And that sometimes changes. So yeah, if it was a few years ago, it might be good to take it again and see. Because sometimes like experiences like this really change things up quite a bit. I can say from personal experience. So your pet peeve?
Oh gosh. Being late.
Motto you live by?
It's funny, I was thinking about this actually this morning. Don't get ready, stay ready.
Oh, nice. Nice. If money were no object, I would
want to be a producer of a TV show, maybe some trashy reality show.
Wow. See the secrets that are coming out, right? Childhood dream career.
Oh gosh, I had a lot of them. It was being everything from firefighter to a police officer to a teacher to a doctor. The last 2 were based off like I would watch a TV show and then like, oh, I want to do this as my career.
Which is why we need a TV show about advisors.
There you
So
go.
Matt, I'm pitching ideas here.
Well, when you're asking future direction of the podcast, I don't know, maybe we'll add that to the list.
Yeah, maybe. Favorite vacation spot?
It's got to be Hawaii.
Okay. Yay!
Yeah.
Thank you. Plug for Hawaii.
Yes.
The one thing you cannot live without?
I'd say friends and family and my partner.
Good answer. A hidden talent.
See, that one's going to draw a blank. I'm going to have to say, even though like you may not see it as that, I would say the podcasting. And part of that is because I didn't really actually consider myself a podcaster probably until about a year ago.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I thought you had been doing this up to the point that you met with Charlie, and it was like, oh, you're already doing it, so why don't you continue? So this is a revelation that are being revealed here. So, if you could pick any superpower, what would you pick?
Ooh, another tough one. And this goes to because I like comics. So I'm thinking right now of like every type of superpower that's out there. I'll say like as a kid, I grew up watching the TV show, the cartoon Captain Planet. And so now kind of looking back at that, one of the characters had a ring and his power was heart. And I would say that probably would be mine to spread love and joy and peace to everybody.
Oh, that is so sweet. Favorite superhero? I think you already might have answered this one.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, I could take it a couple ways. If it's the DC superhero, it would be Batman. If it's Marvel, I would say it's a Cyclops of the X-Men.
And I just have to know why for both of those. Like what about them in specific? So sorry listeners, I'm breaking my own rules here, but I'm so curious. Like why those two?
So for Batman, very easy. He's someone that has no superpowers whatsoever, but his brain is his power. And he is someone that always is planning. And if he doesn't win a fight the first time, he'll evaluate and win it the next time. So he's always thinking ahead. So he's always like 10 steps ahead of everyone else. And Cyclops is someone that is a natural born leader, strategist. And for some reason, a lot of people don't like him. A lot of fans may not like him as much and found him boring. I always found him the most interesting because he was able to lead a bunch of individuals that had a lot of different personalities.
Ooh, wow. I'm glad I asked that follow-up. That sounds consistent with, don't get ready, stay ready, right? And also just your whole philosophy about working with, like, shining the light on everyone, right? Not just the famous or the well-known, right? But everyone who is an advisor and everyone who has a story to tell. So, wow, that's so cool. So now, so you are safely past the 20 question lightning round.
It went a lot better than I thought it would. I'm glad I was able to answer the majority of those right away.
Well, no, you did fabulous, actually. And yeah, we got to learn a lot about you that way. So thank you. And so now let's move on to your everyday citizen disguise, your job at California State University, San Bernardino. And from what I understand, you are an academic advisor in the Advising and Academic Services Office. You started at the university in 2002 as a student assistant in admissions, took a leap to academic advising, and have been an advisor for, is it 11 years now?
11 years. So this March will be 12 years.
Wow. That does, sometimes time certainly flies by. Yes, definitely.
Sure.
And what do you think is most misunderstood about advising?
Yeah, that's a can of worms right there. I mean, if I had to think about it, I would say what's misunderstood, and I think this is maybe why it can be misunderstood, is, we don't have a definitive definition of academic advising. So I think that can maybe lead to it. But I'm glad to hear that I think NACADA does have a group trying to figure that out. So hopefully soon we'll have a standard definition that everyone can use. Because it is one of those things where, like, you ask 10 different individuals that are part of advising, you'll probably get 10 different answers.
For
It
sure.
might be similar, but it's like if you've ever been to a party and you're meeting someone new and you ask what they do and they spend 5 minutes telling you what they do. And afterwards you're like, I still have no idea what you do. I feel like that's where we're at
Right.
with finding that definition of advising. So I think that is part of the misunderstanding. I think it's also still, even after all these years, you have many individuals that still see advising as this transactional piece, and don't really know everything that is involved in it, which again could go to not having a definitive definition of advising. But I think what also can be misunderstood, I was thinking about this the other day, was even those of us that have a pretty good idea of what advising is and know what we do and know just even how much caring and empathy we have to have with our students on a daily basis. I think what's misunderstood is how much of that is draining, doing it for a consistent amount of time. And we might underestimate the toll that has on us as an advisor, especially if we go home with these stories and wake up the next morning with these stories and trying to help our students. I mean, a great example is actually you, Megumi. You have a story in the Advising Pocket Guide, Advising is Forever, through NACADA. And your story, I think, really lends itself to it because you bent over backwards for this student in your story. And ultimately, it ended up working out. But I think the whole idea of like how much we have to give to our students in this type of profession, there's a toll to it. And we need to also hopefully find that mental well-being for ourselves and taking care of ourselves. So, I think that might be it. And then maybe a last thing could be the maybe professional development or lack thereof. NACADA does offer a lot of great professional development, but if we're looking at like specific institutions and what our institutions can give, advising is so different that some general type of professional development may be more watered down and may not be beneficial to advisors. So, maybe those are a few things that might be misunderstood.
Wow. Yeah, definitely you are a superhero fighting on behalf of all of us in terms of shining the light on some of these things. So thank you. And what could, in your opinion, what could the world learn from advisors?
Oh, maybe the overarching broad thing they can learn is that advisors do have an important role at institutions with students, that we do bring a positive difference to students' lives. And in a way, we advising or even advisors are kind of the center point in a way, or the hub for a student's like life at an institution. Because I always see advisors as we're probably the most connected to almost every department on campus and maybe every resource on campus. We may not know all of them or have a deep relationship with a lot of these departments, but we know of them and we know individuals in those offices and departments. So I think anytime a student needs help, we could be that go-to person because we could connect them. Even if we don't know the answer to something, a lot of times at least we'll know this is the person or this is the question to ask this department. So, I think we serve more of an important part than I think others might think we do. And I think if they kind of utilize us in that sense and know that if we're having a lot of these conversations with students, we know what they're saying in appointments, we're connected to a lot of these other departments on campus, then maybe we can be brought to the table more and maybe brought to a lot more conversations. We might be asked more about our opinions and suggestions for student success and institution success. But, we're here, we give, we care, we want to see the best in our students. And we also want to see advising really become a profession.
So there you have it, folks. I think we have the first few frameworks for the reality show on academic advisors that Matt will be putting together in the future. So you mentioned earlier about your book of advising stories. So you and Leah co-edited a book of advising stories entitled Sharing Stories to Ignite or Reignite Your Advising. Could you please share a story about one of your most meaningful advising experiences?
Ooh, yes. I mean, like a lot of advisors, we probably have a lot of different stories. The ones that come to mind are like when I first started in advising, because I don't think many people know, like when I first started advising, I came from admissions. So I thought a lot of the transactional work that, I did in admissions, that's ultimately was what advising was. And it was a rude awakening when I started. So there's these two students that I initially met with in my first couple of weeks, and training at that time. And I think a lot of listeners can agree is like, there really wasn't much training. You kind of learned what you could, maybe shadowed some advisors on appointments, and then you started seeing your students. So like I had one student where I met with them for advising, and I forgot to take off their registration hold, their advising hold. And we had planned out all their classes, everything I thought was good. They came back a week later and said, this hold's still there and the classes are now full. What do I do? And it was a very stressful moment because I knew I had messed up. But luckily, we were still able to find other classes. They weren't necessarily, I remember they weren't necessarily the most ideal times, but the student, for the most part, was understanding of it and eventually still came back. At that point, we didn't have assigned caseloads. So the fact that the student still came back to see me, I was like, okay, the student's giving me another chance. Awesome. Which makes me always want to give students extra chances too, because life happens, things happen. Right. But the other student, and this kind of shows how unprepared that, why training is important is, so the student was doing an advising appointment and ended up telling me that their parent had passed away and, they were failing their classes, and I kind of froze. Right. What am I supposed to say? I ended up saying like, I'm sorry, I'm here if you need anything, but didn't even recommend the resource of, even going to the counseling center. Like that's how frozen I was in that moment. Sure. But that student too still came back. Again, no caseloads, but still decided to come back and see me, and, ended up saying how much they felt like that I cared for them, which is why they wanted to come back. And luckily when they came back, I was better prepared at that moment to share resources and really have more of an in-depth conversation, talk about maybe withdrawing from, some classes based off extenuating circumstances, things like that. But yeah, I mean, those experiences kind of taught me that, yes, as much as we might mess up time to time, that students can see through us, and if we're acting like we care, they'll know. But if they know we care, they'll know that too. And that's what's going to keep them coming back. But it was actually that last experience where I ended up purchasing and this isn't a plug for NACADA publications, but ended up purchasing the blue cover, the Academic Advising Approaches book. And started reading that because I was like, I have to do something to understand what my role actually is and how to actually have these conversations with students. And I will say that was a book that really helped me out that year. Yeah, it has so many different approaches that are super helpful. And again, this is fabulous. It's consistently coming back to, as you were talking, I could see, I remember your superpower question and about heart, right? I mean, I think that's really at the, it's at the heart of it. Right? Sorry, that's so terrible. You need to edit that part out. I'm so sorry. That was awful. No, I think I'll keep that part in.
Oh my goodness. So we're going to shift a little bit more. And I was just curious, let's delve a little deeper in your involvement with NACADA. So one of the typical questions, which I think sometimes is folks don't always remember what they are, but do you remember what your 4 advising communities are that you signed up for when you became a member?
Yeah, so one was the PDR, the probation dismissal and reinstatement advising community, and the other one was the undecided exploratory students advising the community, because at that time when I started as advisor, our office worked mainly with students that were on, at that time we called that academic probation, but academic notice now, and we saw all students that were listed as undeclared or undecided. Since then, we've kind of merged into a centralized advising model, and now we see every single major. But those 2 are the ones that have been consistent. And then I don't know what the other 2 that I had when I first started, but I know like a couple years after that, I ended up adding like the technology and advising community and the advisor training and development community.
And that segues nicely. Like any good superhero, you seem to somehow be everywhere at once, doing good deeds at every turn. So, in addition to the podcast and the Sharing Stories volume that we discussed, you are involved in the Online Education Advisory Board, Emerging Leaders, and you also, and I'm sure there is more that I'm missing, but I know for a fact that you very generously design very sought after metal pins that you share with friends. And when you said your love language is giving gifts, I was not at all surprised because you have this wonderful creativity and this desire to share with others. And I think, that just, that was one of the things that just amazed me so much about you when I first met you, was that, wow, here's this person who I don't even know. And it's kind of, although I guess we have met on various occasions, right? And, but it was just, you were so, your heart really shone through. And so that's one of the things that really impressed me the most. And that's what I wanted to, the purpose of this to be, is that for other people to be aware of that and to appreciate you for everything that you do. So, sorry, I'm getting emotional.
Could you do you remember when we first met?
I think we talked about this before, and it's like, oh gosh, it was a panel, right? Was that the case?
Well, unless we have 2 different versions of it, because I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on it. I thought we first met at Reno at the 2017 Region 9 conference.
That sounds about right, actually. Yeah, no, I think you're correct.
So my colleague and I were doing a presentation, and it was the last presentation time, concurrent session time, on the last day of the conference, and you attended it. We were doing one on undecided exploratory students, and I know you were there because you talked about it afterwards, being in that session. But we were on the bus going from the campus back to the hotel, so we can then catch our rides to the airport. And you overheard us talking about the presentation. You said, "Oh, I went it. I enjoyed it." And you made a comment about how we should be proud that we had that session on the last day and the last concurrent session, because to you, it's something that conference committees might pick certain sessions that they think will have people stay and attend those last sessions. Yes. And I remember Evelyn and I afterwards were like, oh my gosh, like our hearts are fluttering, because that it was such a nice comment and statement, and it made us feel so much better. We had a good turnout, I think, on that session, but it felt even better hearing it from you about the reasoning why we might have had that last session on the last time frame.
Yeah, I remember saying I really want to attend this session, and I hope I make my flight, but I'm gonna go. So and I remember, it was, last day sessions are typically very poorly attended, but that one there was a full room and a lot of grateful people who came out with now that you're saying it's all flooding back, but
Yeah.
that was a while back. So
It was, but that's what I'm saying. Like things like that, little things like that, have a big impact on me. And I remember, it's crazy the things we do remember. We're like, why do I remember that? I shouldn't, but I can't remember where I put my car keys. But
right.
but a comment like that, like it's stuck with me all these years. And Reno just has just that conference, so much came out of that, professional development wise for me, friends that I made at that conference. But yeah, I mean, you're also someone I think that people gravitate towards, and you are a gift giving person as well. So yeah, I think when you're not at a conference, people are bummed out.
Well, I thank you for saying that. That's very kind. But I do think that, I just, again, I'm so grateful. And to be honest, I was also conveying information that I've heard from some of the staff at NACADA. And, I don't know whether they told, because I had a session on the last day, and that's what someone told me. And so I really want to. I was like, oh wow! And then when I saw your session, I was like, yes, this is proof. Like I can't use my own objective experience, but the fact that it is the last day and so many people hung around to hear this session really means that they're conscious of a lot of people saying, hey, it's only a half day, I could get on a plane and be out of here and get a full day's rest before I go back to work, right? But the fact that people stick it out means that it's important. And just like your podcast, it's important, and that's why people are your loyal listeners are always there. Could you talk a little bit more about the programs and projects that you have so generously devoted your time and energy to in NACADA, and why you selected those particular programs and projects?
So definitely, I've taken a step back on some of the NACADA stuff, but the main ones I'm doing right now is I'm still part of the online education advisory board, kind of looking at what could be webinars and your future webinars, and reviewing old webinars and seeing if they're outdated or they could still have some relevance. But the main one really is being a mentor in the Emerging Leaders Program. So that one just started as of October 2024. It's a 2-year commitment. But I was in the Emerging Leaders Program as a mentee, enjoyed that experience, learned a lot. But I think it kind of goes with, doing the podcast and other things. Like I just want to be able to give back, and, whatever I can do to help the next generation, the next group of advising professionals coming up. Can I help support them in their professional development? Can I help support them in their leadership opportunities? Which also then means the product is that academic advising moves forward, overall. NACADA moves forward in a positive way. So, and it's something that, having been a mentee in the program before, I have some of that experience, but all the things I've been able to do since then, whether it's being a region chair or a conference co-chair for a region or annual conference, everything that I've been able to do within NACADA, it's helped me build the friendships that I have, the collaborations I've been able to do. But I think overall, it also just helps with the advising community. So I kind of try to pick things that I know that I'll be able to balance with everything else that I have going on. But I always want to make sure that anything that I'm doing to try to help, I can give 100% to it. Because if I give anything less, people may not know I'm giving less, but I'll know I'm giving less. So, yeah.
And I know you are that way for other reasons. But I did want to attest to the fact that you are a fabulous mentor, because I have a colleague who was mentored by you. And as soon as I heard you were her mentor, I said, you don't know how lucky you are. You just don't know right now. But thank you for doing that and caring so much and passing that torch along. Well, torch of caring.
And I had told Ray, and Ray's an amazing individual. Like, she honestly was the first person that I was officially a mentor for Region 9's pilot program in the mentoring program. So after we were done with the actual official program for that like short 6 months for the pilot, I had told her, yeah, I was very nervous of how things would go because I didn't, what if you didn't like me, or what if I didn't give you enough information? And I think there was the added pressure because she had told me in the beginning, she's like, yeah, Megumi and Matt said, that you're lucky, to have Matt as your mentor. And I'm like, oh no, I got to make sure I that I do exactly what I need to do. And hopefully I make both Matt Ng and I make Megumi proud.
Well, you definitely did. And whoever you mentor is going to be so lucky just to have you in their life, even if it's for a short time. But but I know friendships in NACADA tend to be lifelong, and so you're right. It's we meet people along the way, and we end up really connecting with so many people. So, closing reflection questions and questions about the future. In closing, I would just like to ask, what have you learned from doing the podcast? Just in general, what do you think?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is that I've realized how big the world is and how different advising is at different institutions, different countries.
Yeah.
But at the same time, just how small the world is. Whether it's a podcast or just going to a conference, how you can easily just get connected with other people. And it's really nice to meet other individuals outside of your bubble of your office and your institution. I was saying earlier that that was just recently that I was told that, this podcast is public facing scholarship. And so that is definitely something that I've learned that I never thought about. And, someone that a lot of people know is Craig McGill. And he's the one that was like, dude, this is public facing scholarship that you're doing, He's like, there's research that can be made from this, and hopefully, people do see this as a free resource, something that is accessible, that can lead to academic research, that it's applicable and that does have an impact on advising. I will say what I've learned from the podcast, I made this more connects to what's for me, for myself, is in my day-to-day, I've learned, especially from interviewing so many individuals and sometimes having to think on the spot of questions to ask. I think it's really helped me with my student appointments, of being able to dig deeper into what could be certain issues students might be having. Because sometimes students come in with one question, but maybe there's more to it. And so I kind of try to look at each appointment holistically. And if hey, we have 10 more minutes of this appointment, what else can I ask them? What else can I find out? What else can I recommend to them? Not to overwhelm them, but maybe there's things that the student hasn't considered, or maybe I haven't considered, and maybe I want to ask. And so I want to say it's probably helped me ask more open-ended questions to students.
And what have you learned about yourself by doing the podcast?
I think I was saying this earlier too. Like it was only recently that I really considered myself, maybe I can call myself a podcaster. For some reason, I always thought I was a fraud over these last few years, doing this. But I've learned, like, you don't have to be the best speaker. You don't have to be the best interviewer. A lot of it's about consistency. And as much as I might be nervous, like putting out an episode, what are people going to think? At the end of the day, I don't want that to stop me from doing something. And, I know a lot of us have ideas and, are reluctant to, move forward with it. And I think to anyone listening, this is proof. If you have an idea, do it, whether it's as a pilot just to test it out. You may have people tell you don't do it, but you also have to ask yourself, why are they telling me not to do it? If you have an idea that's going to help your students, help yourself, help staff, help professional development, hey, try it out. So yeah, I've learned about myself is that, anyone can do this. You just have to be consistent with it, and starting it is always the hardest part, but just do it. If you see there's an issue, do something about it. but I also think it's maybe a little bit more confident in my abilities. And and I've realized this is, as much as this is something that is done, not part of my regular job or regular work hours, I still have that motivation and interest to continue it.
And I do have to say that I just really appreciate having been on the other side of this and having been interviewed by you, that it was extremely nerve-wracking on one level, but your genuine care and your genuine wanting to shine a positive light and really point out what is good and what the stories are behind everything. I think I felt very cared for as an interviewee, and it was actually fun. Like, I never thought it would be fun, but it was so much fun. And also thank you for letting me do this, because now you have the experience of what it feels like to be on that side. I did see a shorter clip of a video from you, and I know that sometimes you do videos at work and things, but I really wanted the listeners to know the real you. I mean, and not just you're always asking questions of others. And so this was so inspiring to me, and I'm glad that we were able to spend this time. So thank you, Super Matt, for letting us gain a better sense of the behind the scenes magic that you're able to pull off on a daily basis. And thank you for everything you do for us. I don't know how else to, there's no words to explain just how much you're truly a giving and caring person. And I mean that on all levels with everyone that you encounter, and so I think that's what makes your podcast so popular, is that people feel that and it resonates with them. So thank you so much.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Everything you just said. Yeah, I'm getting a little emotional now too, just hearing that. So I really do appreciate it. And I appreciate you and Anne and Mercedes, continually asking me about doing an interview. And I think putting out my story, and I felt very comfortable with all the questions that you've just asked. And now I'm wondering, why did I wait so long? But I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, we're continuing our 5th anniversary episode of the Adventures in Advising podcast, and let's welcome back guest host, Dr. Melinda Anderson. Hey, Melinda.
Hey, Matt. How are you?
Doing very well, and we have a special guest for this episode to interview, and that's Dr. Kyle Ross, Executive Director of NACADA, the Global Community for Academic Advising. Welcome back, Kyle.
Hey, thanks for having me, and happy 5-year anniversary. That's awesome.
Yes. And how long have you been executive director now? I feel like time has flown.
Yes. So I've been in the role for 1 year and 4 months now. So yeah, a little over a year. Still learning every day.
Yeah. I know when you were last on the podcast, it was less than a year, and I'm already asking you, what's your perspective? And so now that it's been over a year, I thought it would be nice to kind of revisit that. How's it been starting as executive director to, versus now? Has your perspective changed at all?
Yeah, certainly. And I think it's going to keep changing like every day. So there are some things that I feel pretty resolved on. Like, okay, we've got a really strong sense of direction with certain things and how we move forward. What I would say my perspective changes on the most any given day is balancing out what is revenue generating to allow for things that are investments to the members to continue to grow. What is a member benefit? So no additional cost to the members, you just get this, versus what is open to the public. So whether you're a member or a non-member, this is open to you. And that balance changes quite a bit, and it depends on each thing. Publications has a very different philosophy compared to online events, compared to our in-person events. So I think that's where my perspective changes the most, is where there are revenue generating opportunities that allows us to be able to continue to do things that are more of an investment or at cost to the association, or to grow things like our own staff. We are still kind of small when we benchmark ourselves to other executive offices of other nonprofits for higher education. So I think we have some room for growth there, but that does mean we have to strike that balance a little differently sometimes. So I think that that's where my perspective changes quite a bit. This last year, we looked at online events and said, hey, these are open to the public right now. Let's make these a member benefit. Because if a member should get this access to an online event for free, a non-member should either be paying something for it or should become a member to be able to enjoy that benefit as well.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I think, just hearing, the different categories, right, that you named, coming into this role. And when you think about, for example, explaining this to members or, even guiding and leading a staff. And I know that you most recently had a business meeting, right? What has been your philosophy in terms of being able to, for example, cast a vision, right? And then being able to share goals then related to like operationalizing them, right? Because, I was reading Inside Higher Ed today, and they were talking about, either universities coming together in order to save revenue. A lot of people are concerned about enrollments, but I love the way that, even your philosophy of thought around operationalizing, understanding member benefit, versus maximizing, profit potential for the organization in order to be sustained. Like those are really powerful ways to be thinking about the longevity, right? But they're always centered around vision and goals. And so you had a business meeting. And so I don't know if there's anything you would want to share in that business meeting that our listeners would want to know about, because I think organizational strength and sustainability are really important, especially in these times, right? A lot of people are nervous on their campuses. How do I continue to, stay sharp in my profession, right? As I think about continuing to support students. So if you could just share some thoughts about your business meeting and how that continues to cast a vision for NACADA moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So the annual business meeting is held every year. So that we meet one of our requirements of being a 501c3 organization, and that we present the finances to the membership. So objective one was to talk through the 2023 finances after completing our audit, having filed our 990. And overall, we're doing really well financially. In 2023, we generated a profit of about a little over $200,000. And so that's a nice swing from having to survive the pandemic times, which was no fun for any nonprofit association. A lot of us had to dip into reserves. A lot of us had to think through how do we operate differently during that time. And now we're back to flourishing and being successful. So that was a really nice thing to be able to present to the members and say, we're doing great. And so that helps us shape, okay, well, now that we're doing financially well, what does that mean in terms of being able to beef up things that are at cost to the association, but a benefit to the members? So awards, scholarships, different things that we could do to try to make our association as accessible as possible. And then the other piece of the business meeting was we wanted to hold a listening session for folks who joined to be able to share questions, comments, concerns, ideas for the association. We did that last year. That was great. We had about 100 people attend, and I was just typing away, taking notes fast and furious. We wanted to do that again this year. Again, that was successful. Heard some questions and comments around communication of different updates and things that are going on in the association, how to get those more in front of members. So that's helping us think through what information can we get on the website versus our newsletters, like NACADA Next Week and highlights. So that's certainly some really good feedback that we're taking back and saying, okay, we need to rethink some things here. We did have a really great discussion on the globalization of the association, where that's going in the future. The board has supported that we will bring back the international conference in some way, shape, or form in 2026 or 2027 is what we're looking at. But they did say, hey, before we do that, let's really kind of come back to the intention of that international conference. When we look back at 2013, 15, 17, every year we did this, large majority of attendees were folks from the United States. Large majority of presenters for the sessions were folks from the United States. So did we just take a conference that we would typically hold in the United States, put it in a different place? Kind of. And so we want to think through, like, how do we really maximize the engagement of members outside the United States? in these conferences because it's particularly intended for their benefit, and we're bringing the NACADA to them. And so how do we make sure that they're the ones who are generating content, driving the ideas, so that way we're not overdoing here's the American perspective on academic advising when we share it out there. So the Global Initiatives Committee and the Global Conference Advisory Board have recently merged into one group that's really looking more holistically at how do we maximize the engagement of members outside the United States through virtual engagements, through an international conference. Where does that take us in the future? Mm-hmm. Some other updates that the board president, Wendy Schindler, also shared were that a couple of task forces were convened in recent times. So one was to establish a definition of academic advising in the scope of practice. Very excited about that work. We have the concept of academic advising, but even that task force recognized at that time there's too many complexities to academic advising. Mm-hmm. It was so different in so many institutions across the world. We couldn't possibly establish a definition that worked for everybody. Now, in this role over this year, one of my big learning experiences has been, I think there is still a common thread, even through all those complexities. So how can we find that common thread in the definition that we should be aspiring for? Mm-hmm. So looking forward to seeing what comes of that, because we do get questions on what is the formal definition of academic advising for NACADA. We say, well, we don't have one, but we have a concept of academic advising that is informed in the teaching and learning paradigm and perspective. And I think that when we do establish one, that will help institutions greatly in being really more strategic and intentional about how they want to design advising programs. The other thing was a task force was convened on NACADA elections and appointments. And so the intention was to establish a committee around elections and appointments so that there would be a group really holistically reviewing eligibility requirements for positions, how do we recruit folks to positions, if it's an elected position versus an appointed position. When we look at appointments, are those processes fair and transparent to those who are interested in those roles? And so really being strategic across all of those things. The way we've done elections has been fairly consistent for several years now. And I think that there's some opportunities for us to say, how do we make sure that we are preparing people for these roles, that they're as fully informed as possible on what positions are available to them and what those requirements are. And then from there, what makes someone really successful in the position, and how do we craft eligibility requirements that are not restrictive, but rather really clear to the person interested, here's what it takes to be successful in this position. Mm-hmm. So work is still going on that, but the board did support creating a committee on NACADA elections and appointments, and they're underway on figuring out who's going to be on that committee at the onset. So those are a couple of updates from the board of directors that Wendy shared. And yeah, so that's kind of the ongoing work of the association right now that we shared at the business meeting. And as far as kind of my vision and things that I'm looking at ahead of for the future, my role is helpful in what can the executive office do to best support the association? So what are the priorities that we can address that are in alignment with the board's strategic plan, that are the things that we can uniquely do for the association, where there's a lot of other great work that the volunteers and members of our association can do. So we say, let them do that while we can really work on this, or how can we support their work as well?
Right. Well, no, I mean, I think, and I'm hoping that there's a lot of layers and complexity in terms of the internal and then the external, forces, right, that nonprofits are finding themselves in, just given the level of competition for people's times, talent, energy, and monies, right, in terms of what is currently in the playground these days, and so just kudos to the work that you've done and the board's done. And, Matt and I, were able to sit with Zorana a couple of weeks ago and to hear about the good work that the board has done coming, out of the conference experience. And so, just hearing, coming out of the business meeting. So thank you so much for sharing again with us, a lot of the work that's been happening. So we appreciate that. And thank you again. And kudos, right? It's a lot of work, to try to keep and maintain those balances. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
I know I went to like a business meeting years ago, and I think at that time, like you all were passing out like the actual, like, here's how much the we have for the budget for the executive office. And we see that larger number. We're like, wow, NACADA has all this money. And then you start looking at where does all that money go? And I'm like, how does NACADA survive on this? And I guess that leads into a question I have in terms of, and I feel like we talk about this all the time or every year, budget cuts at a lot of institutions, especially like, let's say with California, where I'm at. I know all the CSUs have been told, okay, we're reducing. I mean, we had 2 Cal States that kind of merged, but then you have like NACADA as an organization and has these leadership positions. Do you fear that, like, with a lot of budget cuts at other institutions and more work that's now placed on these individuals at institutions, that they may want to get involved in an organization like NACADA, but might not now?
Yeah, that's a very real possibility, and we're seeing that across organizations as well, even more broadly than higher education nonprofits. So I'm a member of ASAE, American Society for Association Executives, and one of their conversations that they're talking about a lot and consistently has been creating these micro volunteer opportunities for the folks who can no longer commit to full term to your positions or your positions, where if you want to get involved right now because the timing is right, you have the support, great, here's what you can do in a very isolated time frame. Mm-hmm. So I think we need to really spend some more time diving into those conversations a little early on that, because seeing that come up, and I was like, okay, so that's a trend that we're seeing in other organizations. We're not going to be exempt from that in the future. So I think that that's something, yes, that we do have to look at. Sometimes there's an opportunity there, though, for members who see that they're not always getting this support from their institution because budgets are real, enrollment cliff is here. We are living in that time right now that if they're not feeling that support at their institution, then they'll seek NACADA or other organizations to grow their skills, advance themselves. So I haven't seen too much of a dip yet, but we are thinking that that's a very real possibility as institutions are definitely looking at budgets very closely right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, I mean, Matt, I appreciate your question, because that's definitely, a lot of our conversations too about how do we continue to think about professional development as not an option, right, but a need, especially as we know that the support around student success work is something that has gained traction in the past couple of years. But then thinking about the political waters or spaces that we are now standing in, right? What kind of impact or implications is that going to have on institutions? So I do appreciate that. And then Kyle, to your point, how do we continue to offer what level of support that people need at the time that they need it? So I do love that concept of even micro volunteering, but then how do you help institutions and members for whatever they need in this moment, but then also maintain relationships so people know that, that I'm here when you need me. And I think that that's a very powerful way to think about sustainability of any organization or institution at this point. Because, Matt, I was reading about mergers and consolidations of institutions this morning. And I've just got to stay away from the Chronicle inside higher ed when I get up in the morning, because I'm just like, what is happening? Like, I go to bed at night and then I wake up like, what's happening in higher ed? But, Kyle, that leads us to like our next question around like the direction of academic advising and student success, right? We all have these buzzwords, right? Holistic student supports academic advising. And so you're talking about like, even around the definition of academic advising. And when I think about the work happening in NACADA, driving that conversation, but you're in a field where a lot of people are putting their hands in that work. How do you think that, given the complexity of the environment that you're operating in right now, how do you envision to keep driving those conversations? I mean, we do have a research center in NACADA, and so I think that definitely gives you a leg up where most places do not have something at that level. So I'm just wondering, have you guys given some thought around how do you keep driving and being in front of that conversation with so many people in the sandbox?
Yeah, that's a great question. So 2 answers to that. First, NACADA needs to start being a little bit bolder in some of the positions that we take. So hence why we're doing that definition of academic advising. This is what NACADA defines as academic advising. Otherwise, when academic advising has historically been undefined, you find that it gets anchored in the institution's priorities, and therefore the institution's priorities define academic advising. And then that leads to inconsistent student experiences over time. If we say that advising is a retention tool, becomes a retention tool, that has implications for what academic advising is structured like and is supported or not. Advising is a teaching and learning tool, then it becomes a different thing. Advising is related to enrollment management, different set of priorities. So if NACADA says this is the definition, that helps avoid that turbulence that we sometimes see with, okay, we're going to change it because new strategic plan, therefore this has to look different. But it should still be linked to institutions' priorities, right? So striking that balance of this is what it should be consistently, but this is also how it can help support the institution's strategic plan. Other things that we can take bolder positions on, as we look with the research center, as you said, one of the things that we're trying to build out is a data set to help benchmark institutions across, particularly the United States for now, starting with that. Okay, so small private institution, 4-year, here's what the current average is or data shows on centralized versus decentralized, caseloads, faculty, professional advisors, all kinds of different data that you can pull on that. And then that will help us inform some of those bigger questions that we would love to answer, like what is the caseload ratio that NACADA would recommend to an institution? We don't have that recommendation right now. People keep coming back to the 2011 study where we reported a median and averages, but didn't say that this is the number we recommend. It was just 300 to 1 was the approximate median for large Research One public universities at the time that the study was conducted. But now we're seeing that as other organizations are getting involved, they're hearing those same questions getting asked. And where NACADA said we don't have a recommendation due to too many complexities, then those organizations will say, well, if they're not going to answer it, we will. So I think that if we kind of shift our mentality there and say there are common threads to academic advising, here are those things that NACADA has found, that will help us continue to stay ahead of the curve.
Yeah, and I love hearing that. And I know we keep talking about the future, but I wanted to get this question in, and this is actually from Nathan Vickers. So this is his question to you, Kyle, is when you look back on 2024, what are 3 words that you would use to describe 2024?
That's a great question. For me, one word is learning. My gosh, I have been learning a lot every day in 2024. Joys of having a strong advising background, but not been an association executive before. That's where my learning curve is at right now. So I would say learning, number 1. 2, change. With new leadership always comes change. I think that's just a natural phenomenon in organizations, but we had some catalysts for change this year in the association. One being that the organizational consultant that we contracted to do a holistic review of the association. That was during the time that Melinda was executive director, doing an RFP process and getting that started. Thank you, Melinda. Bostrom has completed that work, submitted a report to the board, and we're taking that in chunks and saying, okay, well, which recommendations do we pursue now? One of those being, for example, that NACADA Elections and Appointments Committee. So some catalysts for change. And we've been following through on those pretty quickly and trying to prioritize which recommendations can we pursue now, which ones may need to wait as the organization does go through change. So learning, change, and then the third word is excitement. So folks are really excited for the opportunities that we're providing to them. Folks are always so excited to come to our in-person events. I had the opportunity to go to all the region conferences this year in the annual conference, and just feels like people are like, this is my professional Disneyland. I found it. And so just the excitement in the air there, and being able to engage with their peers and colleagues, especially after several years of not being able to do so in person. So yeah, learning, change.
Excitement.
Nice.
Learning, change, excitement. LCE. I love that. I love that because I want to capitalize on excitement because Matt and I also wanted to talk to you about the celebration of 50 years of NACADA, because even coming out of Pittsburgh, which was amazing, by the way. So again, kudos. And we had a really great time. And so really excited about gathering together. And I agree with you. There was a lot of excitement in Pittsburgh. And you're right about people just being able to gather together, seeing friends that they hadn't seen in a long time, making new friends, new folks coming into the profession. And like you said, finding a home, like you do this work, like I do this work. Oh my God, I found me here, right? And that is just amazing to watch and see that come together. And so what are some thoughts or things that you can share with us about looking towards celebrating 50 years? Because that's significant and awesome and amazing.
It is huge for us, and we're so excited. And the nice thing about our organization is we kind of have two sets of anniversaries, right? We've got the anniversary of the annual conference. So that one was in 2027. First annual conference was in 1977. So 50th year of the annual conference at that point. And then NACADA was officially chartered as an organization in 1979. So we hit 2029 for the 50th year of the overall establishment of the organization. So we get an opportunity to continue to celebrate NACADA's birthday over a set of several years.
Nice.
Yeah. So very excited for that work. We're a little early in those conversations right now, but I think what I've seen from how other organizations celebrate, and certainly things that I want to take back to NACADA with, is one, celebrating our history. Right, so honoring the history of the establishment of the annual conference, the chartering of the organization, all the accomplishments over 50 years, growing from a few people to 14,000 members, huge. Celebrating accomplishments of all the different communities that have been established, the other events and resources that we offer, proliferation of publications and online education. So really honoring the past and then celebrating in that moment. So really then taking the time to say, here we are now in the present, celebrate where we're at right now, and then looking towards that future. So what kinds of exciting things can we be rolling out at that point for people to say, now I see where NACADA is going to be in the next 50 years after that, as we look towards the 100th year anniversary way down the road. So I think part of that is that continued professionalization of academic advising. So once we establish that definition, that also has some impacts towards, well, then that can inform things like reviewing our core values, core competencies, maybe establishing a code of ethics. And then what else does that mean for what advisors can look at and say, now I'm demonstrating my learning, and NACADA is able to document that learning as a result of being able to directly relate it to a definition to these competencies. That's something that's currently missing in the association. A lot of times members don't have that opportunity to say, see, here's the thing that shows I learned this. I have that right now with micro-credentials and digital badges, but what else can we be doing to help advisors be able to demonstrate advancement of their competencies in academic advising and the justification for maybe advancement or looking towards future roles.
Nice. I'm excited.
I think going along those lines, I think this could be a great question to connect with that is, what's your message to NACADA members or even listeners of the podcast that more than likely are NACADA members as we start 2025? You know, what's your general message?
General message is really center in on your why of why you are an academic advisor and in the profession. I know folks have a lot of anxieties going into 2025 with budgets, institutions. The enrollment cliff is here. National Student Clearinghouse has been publishing some really fascinating data with that. But there always is opportunities in some of those places where we see anxiety. So enrollment cliff. What we're also noticing is that enrollment cliff is being made up for by different demographics. One being dual enrolled students. So students who are in high school and then also completing college coursework at the same time. What does that mean for the profession? How can academic advisors deepen their knowledge around advising that population? And then there's students who decided, I'm not going to go to college while it's virtual in the pandemic time. And now are thinking, okay, now it's the right time for me to enroll. So National Student Clearinghouse, as affectionately called those, the pandemic stockouts. One just said, this isn't the right time for me now, I'm coming back. So what I think we're going to have an opportunity to dialogue around how does advising look a little different in terms of being able to tailor itself to those populations. So I'm really excited for that in 2025. But centering on your why are you in this role? Why do you love the profession so much? Why do you love working with students and their success? Will help you remind yourself, even during those times where you're feeling stress and anxiety around your institution's budget and overall fiscal health, changing trends in higher education overall. So focus on that, and that should help you continue into your future too.
Wonderful. Well, look, it's always good to have a message of hope, right? As you go into the new year, I always have a New Year's resolution. Matt, we've always joked about this. My New Year's resolutions that never really pan out. They kind of peter out like around February. But I do, Kyle, I do appreciate your message of hope and, for people to center on their why and to remember, why you do what you love and how that can accelerate you in those moments, and then to lean into your community. So absolutely, which is one of those reasons why we're all together here today in this podcast, is community.
Well, I appreciate you both being on the podcast for this, especially also to celebrate 5 years of the podcast. And
Absolutely.
None of this would have happened without NACADA, without the both of you, without Charlie. So I really appreciate all of you.
I just appreciate always the hard work, because I know it is hard work, just the organization and the scheduling. But I love how people are always willing to step up to the mic and to be interviewed by you. And I think that says a lot about who you are. So thank you so much for, offering opportunities to host with you. And Kyle, thank you so much for being willing to let us interview you and to hear more about what's happening in the organization and how you'll continue to be leading us forward in this work and the professionalization of advising. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And it was really great to see you all. And congratulations again. Happy 5-year anniversary.
Thanks.